Come on, I think you have to give me permission.
Yep, got it.
Cool. Okay. All right, prompt number two, disagreement essay. Describe a time when you strongly disagreed with someone about an idea or issue. How did you communicate or engage with that person? What did you learn from this experience? Caroline?
So this is a typical question that you'll hear throughout your life, not limited to college essays, but absolutely in the workforce. Like anytime that I'm interviewing now, I still get this kind of question. Um, this question is not asking for like, in my opinion, a time that like, oh yeah, I won an argument. No, you want to present either a way where you took something away that, you hadn't known previously, or that, the disagreement was caused by someone who was causing ill to others and how you may have positively influenced them to change their perspective. And so like either way, it's kind of like almost a negotiations question. Um, it's about how you navigate or adapt through like new transitions or react to new knowledge, because ultimately Harvard wants to build that diverse community of thought so that they can inspire one another and use all that knowledge that they're learning to go on to bigger and better things. So for this one in particular, I would kind of lean into your own experiences, again, during which you were resilient, learned something new, or had a thoughtful and open-minded approach during your conversations. Ideally, you'd want maybe some kind of interaction or exchange that led to a collaboration together, or a great example of conflict resolution or at least mitigation, but definitely want to showcase some moment of growth for yourself. And then in structuring this, I would say like describe both sets of views, like why each person was arguing what they were arguing, present how you were thinking about your perspective, but then how, as the conversation went on, your perspective started shifting, and then what the outcome of that navigation was.
Um, I'll add to that briefly, just on I guess again like a bigger sense of just like a bigger picture sense of like your application as a whole. Um, and just thinking about like the purpose of your essays. You've had other kind of parts within your Common App where you can talk about kind of your successes, your achievements, stuff that you've done. And like really like the priority of your essays is like you want to really like tell the reader kind of what your value system is. Um, and I guess like this essay gives you a chance to show it gives what you want to kind of convey through this essay is that like your world perspective is definitely something that's malleable, and that kind of like you're not necessarily kind of like um staunch in your mindsets, but you also know how to kind of represent them effectively to people, and kind of how you can I guess like engage in debate around that productively. So I think that's kind of like definitely something that's critical for this essay in particular, particularly in like what did you learn from this experience. um and again, I think that gives you like that's your opportunity there to be kind of reflective, be introspective.
Mm.
um yeah. And then the other thing about I suppose like about any kind of like disagreement essay is I think what they're looking for isn't necessarily to get bogged down in the details of kind of necessarily what the disagreement was. Um, they're more looking for like the process of like conflict resolution. You're about to kind of go into college and kind of like um receive like so much exposure to kind of like facets of life that you weren't necessarily aware of beforehand. So it's really about showing that like you'd be someone who'd be well positioned to kind of take that all in, and kind of like really go at it without preconceptions. Um, so I think kind of um, yeah, I think like just in terms of like thinking about purpose of the essay, that hopefully um kind of like positions kind of that specific response as well.
Yeah, I think you guys make great points. It sounds like they just want to see how you handle conflict and how you come to resolutions with your peers. And also, guys, this essay, I've seen this essay at Brown, I'm pretty sure, and a few other Ivy League colleges. It's very, very common. So whatever Hemi and Caroline's saying right now is applicable to other schools as well. Okay, so the extracurricular essay. Briefly describe any of your extracurricular activities, employment experience, travel, or family responsibilities that have shaped who you are. Caroline, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the theme so far of these three prompts has been Harvard is shaping future leaders who are open in their interactions and are able to navigate unique experiences and apply them towards something greater. So I would say like this is another great place that you can potentially like showcase your values and other open-minded opportunities that you have experienced yourself. This is a great question for any first generation college students, I think, or first generation Americans, immigrants, because it's a chance for you to like offer that unique takeaway or unique perspective. Definitely, I think remember to turn your microphones off, otherwise we get that lovely echo. um, where was I? ADHD moment. There we go. Like stories of resilience or cultural exchange, or if you have ADHD or some other, well, ADHD in the US is considered a intellectual disability. So for example, like that would be for me a great perspective. If I were to address this question now, one way that I might do it is I was diagnosed with ADHD late in life, and it explains a lot of my little quirks. And I can talk about the resilience that comes with it in overcoming certain challenges, how I'm able to be resilient and thrive through those, and maybe like providing an example of, how I use it to my advantage, such as through my superpower. I'm looking at family responsibilities in particular because I have a disabled sister who basically requires help with everything that she does because she has severe autism, which is another intellectual disability. And from that perspective, like, how many Harvard students do you think that have that kind of a background that need to be a caregiver to a family member? So from something like that, I would say like, oh, because I've had this family responsibility in my background, I'm able to offer this unique perspective. I have these values that would then contribute to Harvard in XYZ way. And maybe like that's why you want to be a part of like the mental health advocacy group on campus, or that's why you want to be a pre-med and take part in some like volunteering activities after school at Harvard as an extracurricular, things like that. That's enough from me. Over to you.
Yeah, so I think maybe give like some examples of like some ideas that you could talk about here. And I think particularly I'd firstly, just to start it off, I think don't deprioritize um travel or family responsibilities. I think often kind of like you read this as okay, like talk about like your extracurricular activity essay. So like talk about one of the things that you talked about in your Common App and like maybe go into more detail about it. Um and I think you probably have like it's maybe easier to come up with like good ideas as to like um how those have like shaped who you are, especially if they're very kind of like vocationally focused. But I think family essays which talk about kind of like your responsibilities, kind of like within your family or within your community, often provide like this kind of like other light that's not always seen within a lot of applicants. And I think that can be very beneficial. So I think firstly that's something to consider. Um, but I guess like giving like specific examples just because sometimes it can be hard to like conceptualize, okay, what does that actually look like? Um, if I was to write like a family responsibility essay, I did this not for Harvard, but for a different school actually. And I talked about how, for example, my grandmother lived with us, kind of like within our house, and how kind of like there were kind of difficulties kind of going to like I don't know, doctor's appointments, for example. because kind of like there were language barriers there, and kind of how that experience just helped me understand like kind of like how like experiences of kind of healthcare and like all these systems that we have like differ so much based on like individual context as well. That's just like an example. Or if I wanted to talk about extracurricular activities, I think one of my favorite essays that I wrote was about research. And again, like huge shout out to Rice, because the research that they help you guys do is really high quality. Is if I knew about it back in high school, I'd definitely like be engaged with that too. But I think with research, I talked about my experience, not just kind of like the nature of my research. I think that was kind of clear from maybe like where I put it down as an activity. Um, but really like what was that experience like conducting my own original research? So kind of both like, and I think like yeah, approaching the essay, and or at least like the writing portion of this, it was a balance between like, okay, like how much of this do I focus on like talking about kind of like experiential like or like my emotions during the time, or like what it feels like to stay up until like 5 a.m. like working on a paper whilst drinking some coffee. And that's stuff they want to hear. Um and then also how much of it should I focus on like maybe the bigger picture of stuff and like what it taught me about research as a whole, research in general, how it like informed whether or not research is something that I want to continue pursuing at college as well. Um, and I think like at least like within the essay that I wrote, I was able to sort of I guess like balance between those two facets. Um, yeah, and I think like there's definitely like there's no like good one way to do it. But I think like if there's when you're planning out your prompts, figure out exactly kind of okay, these are like these are kind of like your achievables. These are kind of like what I want to hit through like writing this essay, and then play around with balance. Maybe write like a few different drafts which like focus on different stuff, and then maybe review that. Maybe like in the context of the big application as a whole, have people read over it. And eventually you'll figure out kind of what works for you, I think.
Yeah, and don't overthink it either. I feel like when I was applying to Harvard, I got writer's block so many times because I just got caught up in what does Harvard want to hear? What does Harvard want to hear? I would say like one of the best recommendations probably Himi and I both could give is just start writing, and then it will eventually hit you like, oh, wait, this is actually a moment of inspiration. Like this experience that has happened, like, okay,
Mhm.
this is probably I can use this example to showcase something for this question.
Yeah, it sounds like the takeaway here is like improve through iteration and not just try to be perfect your first draft. Cool. So for the next question, we're gonna mix it up a little bit here. We're gonna have Hemi start first, followed by Caroline. So this is the why us essay. Basically, every college you apply to, the elite ones are gonna ask you some semblance of this. So it reads, how do you hope to use your Harvard education in the future? Hemi, do you want to kick us off?
I think this is maybe of all the essays that you'll have, perhaps one of the easiest that you have to do. And I think like the reason for that is um often like you can go into college with like a decent sense, maybe not of like necessarily what you want to do in the future, but like you have a decent sense of like what's interesting to you, what problems matter. And I think like really this essay is an opportunity to talk about that. Um, I think specifically kind of what it's trying to get at is that um Harvard shouldn't be your end goal. Harvard should be kind of a means to something bigger. And what you want to emphasize in that essay is not just about I don't know, maybe like a particular program or like a particular course of study or like particular resources that are available at Harvard to help you achieve that goal. Um, Kind of speaking about that is definitely very important. I think also you want to emphasize just like this notion of um almost this notion of like wanting to really like make a difference in the world. And I know that sounds maybe kind of a bit cliche, but um and again like this isn't like a fit-all sort of this isn't like a fit-all sort of description, but I think Harvard's often looking for people who see like an issue in like the world that maybe they've grown up in or that they've seen around them, and they want like a way of like being able to make some difference to that. So I think like particularly this is like a good opportunity to bring in like kind of your experiences, your background, um, and maybe like tie this into like the rest of like your kind of applications theme as a whole. Um, Talk about kind of your goals, your bigger goals beyond Harvard, and then like be specific about kind of particular bits of Harvard's education or kind of like the infrastructure surrounding it that allows you to kind of that you think would be like that would position you well into kind of that bigger long-term aspiration, I guess.
Honestly, not much to add. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the concept of what's called servant leadership, basically like how can you serve your community best and, basically perform altruistically. That is really big at Harvard. And when Himi said, what you do with your education beyond the Harvard years, I think is the crux of this why us essay. Like, how can you leverage Harvard, or rather, how can you leverage your Harvard education in the future? I would just say, like, it kind of returns to what question one was talking about, and you want to do your research beforehand about each program and what you might want to pursue or what kind of extracurricular community you might want to engage in. Like, how is Harvard serving as a stepping stone on your journey? Maybe a better way to put that. So yeah, that's all I have to add. Great job, Himi.
I love what you guys are saying, right? Because for a lot of the people in this chat, Harvard is like the ultimate goal. And I don't even think students can even think beyond what's after Harvard. But Hemi, Caroline, it really seems like you guys are touching on the fact that Harvard should not be the end goal. It is really a stepping stone for what you ultimately want to achieve, the long-term impact. I just want to highlight that, guys. Harvard should not be the end goal for you guys, if you guys want to get in. Okay, so the roommate essay, I believe this is also something that's at Stanford as well. Top 3 things your roommate might like to know about you. Emmy, do you want to kick us off?
Um, I think here, just before I speak about kind of like specifics and content wise, I think like tone here is really important just when you're thinking about the essay. And like again, like you're not I unless you're a brilliant writer, I don't think anyone nails tone like first draft. But at least like when you're thinking about revisions and stuff, um imagine like you're writing to a peer. So whilst you don't want to be like wholly informal because ultimately this is a college application, um I'd say as much as you can be very as like personal as you can, um talk reasonably. I think like imagine like you were speaking to, I don't know, like a class, like a new classmate perhaps, or like someone who's just like come to your school, um and like think about like the way in which that you'd address them, like formal but like not too formal, you know. So um I think like firstly that's important, and they want to see that like I don't know, people are able to do that. You're able to um I don't know, like gauge audience at least like within your essays. But in terms of like specific content, um it's again like this is very much like an open-ended essay. You can sort of talk about a bunch of different things. Oftentimes I think it's like a good way of approaching it is talking about kind of maybe like specific like interests you might have, or like specific activities you might, I don't know, be interested in pursuing at college as well. And maybe like that might be something that you'd want to do with your college roommate too. Um, Another like way of approaching it could be just talking about kind of maybe like your cultural experiences, kind of your background in that sense, or like any other kind of like important aspects of your identity that you think, I don't know, kind of like really kind of like provide like a good insight of as to like the sort of person you are. Of course, you're not going to be able to sum up everything about yourself, and this essay isn't like expecting you to do that. So if you're struggling thinking, how do I like fit all of my personality into like this one essay, it's not meant to do that. It's just like it's a brief taster, an intro, an icebreaker, if you will. Um, and yeah, I think like really get creative with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you covered, yeah, a good amount there, because if you guys were paying attention to the other prompts as well, like they're very thematic and they're all trying to kind of get at the same things about what assets you bring, about who you are, like what are the things that you're most interested in and passionate about. So I think Hema did a really great job of discussing that. And also something you said, like you're writing to your future roommate. I have seen so many like Harvard like first time applicant essay drafts that, you know, are super creative, and like some of them have literally done the essay as a letter to their roommate. Like, dear future roommate, I'm looking forward to, you know, getting to know you and getting into a lot of mischief together or whatever, something like that. So that's, you know, it has to obviously answer the crux of the question, be formal, but you can also have a little fun with it too, like within reason. Ask your teachers like if you think that's, you know, the best way to go about it, but that's, I leave that to your discretion. um I think in addition to like being creative and how you relay these things to a future roommate, this question is equally as important about like being honest about yourself and how well you know yourself. Hey, maybe you'll be able to help me here, but when I was a first year, they had us fill out a housing application so they can group us with roommates, based on, you know, a lot of things like your habits, what time you wake up, do you prefer, you know, getting work done in the afternoon or late in the evening, do you like throwing parties, things like that. I'm seeing some nods there, so it looks like they still are doing that. So don't lie on that test, because they want to basically put you all together in a way that like you're all going to jive well, you're all going to get along. And so this question I think lies as like a precursor to that, because it's about being honest about who you are and showing pride in that and saying like, yeah, I do like working past the hours of XYZ because that's just how my brain works. And so I feel like one of the biggest things that first years at Harvard struggle with is just not knowing who they are. So they struggle with identity, they struggle with direction, they struggle with transition. So this question I think is just about as much is as much about reflection as it is about showcasing your unique aspects and value add. And I'll leave it there.
So it sounds like the main takeaway is like they really just want to know who you are underneath all the accomplishments, just like who you are as a person. And I think you mentioned tonality being like you just gotta sound like a human being. Don't be like overly formal. Okay, so we have 15 minutes left, and we're gonna open it up to Q&As. We're gonna open it up to Q&As. So guys, if you guys have any questions, just raise your hand and I will call you up.
Can we actually get rid of the PowerPoint? And if you guys are able to, what do you call it, come on camera, I'd love to like see the face to the person.
Uman, you want to go?
Yeah, thank you so much. I love the presentation as well and your answers. But Caroline, I had a question for you. How did you tie in your nonprofit work into your essays, and would you say that was the main part of your application?
So funny you should say that. When I was interviewing to be a mentor with Pegasus, I talked with to Jeff about this. I think that's one of like my guiding threads throughout life is I love to volunteer and I love helping people accomplish their goals. So from 8th grade to 12th grade, I did 300 plus hours of community service each year. And I did talk about that a lot. Like, why do I do these things? So I'm sorry, remind me of your question. My ADHD just spiked.
Like, would you say that was like, I guess, the main part of your application, like your spike, I guess, or like the first thing you would put on your activities list?
I would say so. I would say I would organize it thematically because it would depend on the type of volunteer activity, but I would definitely highlight like how I served others first in answering these kinds of questions. Um, as you go throughout the like Harvard College application essay, I'm sure if I recall correctly, there are places to like showcase your extracurriculars holistically. So I also did things related to music and sports and athletics outside of school. So once I did talk about like the volunteer aspects and the nonprofit work, it all kind of tied in together and made sense and provided Harvard a comprehensive picture of who I am. So I think like that's ultimately the goal of what Harvard wants to see, similar to what Jeff said at the end.
Got
Thanks,
it.
Umang. That was a great question.
Ahmed, you want to go?
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah, all right. So my question is that I currently I'm like an international student in Turkey as well. So and I'm like involved in all of these extracurriculars. I'm with working with different non-profit organizations at directorate level. So do you think like it would be possible for me to arrange like a 1 year transfer program or like a transfer program to any of the top Ivy League universities?
So I don't know too much about transfers. I know them they definitely exist, and so I know like there's some people in my year who transferred after 1 year at college. Um, I think the application process is slightly different to what it is for college admissions, however. Um, I'm not sure how much I can say on that, Caroline.
I think it transfers meaning what? Meaning you're already attending a university and you want to do like a year abroad? Can you speak a little bit to that? Or do you mean just basically transfer abroad and be an international college student? Can you just clarify that for me?
I would I would prefer if like it would be a 1 year program would be enough as well, but I would prefer if I could just like change my university at that point to that university if like they can see I can perform well with them.
I think it's definitely possible. I've met a couple of students during my time at Harvard where they, started somewhere and then wound up finishing out at Harvard. As long as you're able to showcase there is a reason that you are changing programs or that you are transferring to the US to Harvard because Harvard specifically offers something that will help you grow and achieve what you want to do later on in life. I think that would make a strong case, like especially if you're involved in all these nonprofits, and maybe like Harvard could provide like this unique insight that your current circumstances don't provide. I think it's absolutely possible. It's all about how you frame it. And again, if you want to talk to Himi and me about this like more specifically and in more detail, feel free to message us on LinkedIn, and at least I will be happy to set up a time. I actually can't speak for Himi.
I will too. Yeah.
I also have another question, preferably from Caroline. I'm also suffering from like part ADHD, partial ADHD. So how did that help you in your extracurricular journey? Because when you have an ADHD, so you are not happy with one field, you have one leg in another field and another in like two three fields at the same time.
Yeah, I definitely struggled with that during university and still do sometimes. I would say that it helped me because it did give me so many unique perspectives. And I think one of the things at Harvard was that definitely able to see from my application was, being that curious about things. They definitely like curious minds. Um, Later on, I did have to overcome the challenge of learning to say no to things and learning to prioritize, focus in on the one thing, and to do one thing successfully. Because there's the famous saying, "You're a jack of all trades, but a master at none." And it's true to some extent. You want to really polish one thing first, and then if you want to do like little satellite organizations or satellite interests that are all connected by one giant thread, I think that would be like the most comprehensive way to showcase to Harvard that, yeah, this is the core thing that connects all of these common interests. But I'm also still curious about other realms and I'm going to be what's called a lifelong learner. So I think all of those things are great attributes. I don't want to take away time from other people's responses. So why don't we move on to another person? Jeff, I'll leave that to you.
We have a
Yeah,
question
I
in
think
the chat actually from Jessica. It says, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes in applications?
yeah, we can answer that one, and then we can. I know Ruth, you can go next.
I'm happy to take that. Okay, I think some of the biggest mistakes, firstly, repeating the same information that's on your maybe like your extracurricular section or your awards section. Um, and I think like you really need to be purposeful about what it is that your essays specifically are about. Um, yeah, there's certain domains of like the application where like that give you the opportunity to talk about your successes. Your essays really aren't whilst like maybe perhaps like you could mention them, that shouldn't be like the driving purpose behind um your essays. Your essays specifically, I think, really are focusing, they're looking for that like sense of introspection, reflection, self-appraisal, those sort of like kind of like inward personality qualities and kind of qualities of your character and your value system. And that's sort of kind of what you want to focus on. So I think like I've seen like examples where like people have like basically given like a rundown of like one of the extracurriculars that they've done. And I think that doesn't really get kind of like the goal that like you want your essays to serve towards.
Caroline, do you want to also touch on that as well?
I would say let me think on it. I'll answer in the chat, but I have examples in my head, but I want to like find the common crux. So let me get to that in the chat.
There's too many common mistakes. Arush, do you want to go?
So my question was that how did you guys like figure out specifically what major you wanted to do and what like event or extracurricular like helped you realize this?
I'm happy to start. I think I definitely still don't know what I'm necessarily majoring in. And I think like going into college you can have like ideas and I think it's definitely good to have those ideas. But like part of like I think what's like so attractive about kind of US education as a whole is it gives you that flexibility to try stuff out and figure out what works for you. Um in terms of like how I figured out that I maybe want to do math and CS more. I took some classes and I took some math classes, I took some CS classes, took some engineering classes, took some random classes in anthropology and languages, Arabic and kind of all these like kind of like fields which maybe I didn't have necessarily much exposure to prior to college. And I just thought about kind of what I liked, what I wanted to learn more about. And that doesn't always also have to line up kind of what you want to do vocationally as well. I think in my case it happened to, but it was really about, okay, for me it was a judgment call of like next semester, what would I be motivated to take? And then also maybe in 20 years' time, what sort of classes do I think I'm going to remember? Um, so that for me, I think was kind of like my decision process. Um, and that kind of like ended up building towards what my major is right now, which is a whole mix of a bunch of different stuff, really. Um, yeah. I also one thing I'd recommend, especially to kind of like incoming students, is um don't just take classes for the sake of maybe fulfilling requirements. I think like you have to graduate at the end of the day, but you're afforded so much space within your curriculum and so much flexibility to try stuff out. Um, I think it would be a waste not to. So I think yeah, I think like don't taking stuff really for like reasons kind of like beyond necessarily like having to take something. That should be something like to consider. Maybe not necessarily for applications, but if you guys end up here, hopefully.
Okay, we have
I'm sorry.
oh Caroline, did you want to answer that one, or should I?
Yes,
The one
just
last one in the chat. All right, I'll let you go ahead.
yeah, just very quickly, Harvard kind of makes you do that anyway. They are a liberal arts school. So you have to fulfill like these liberal art requirements that almost task you with, okay, think outside the box a little bit. And there are these kinds of classes that don't typically like fall in the scope of one particular program. So they'll have like aesthetics and interpretive understanding, or at least that's what it was called when I was, and they'll have others that are focused more on empirical methods and things like that. So you'll have the opportunity to do those and build towards like your overall degree. But totally echoing what Himi said, just make sure you don't close yourself off from other opportunities. Freshman seminars are also, or first year seminars are also a great way to kind of think outside the box about like potential classes you might want to take. I again went into Harvard thinking I was going to be a neuroscience major and pre-med, but because I took my freshman seminar was Harvard and Egyptian archaeology and Harvard's role basically in a bunch of excavations in Egypt, that made me want to pivot to being an anthropology major. Sorry, Celeste, go ahead.
No, thank you for that. Okay, so we have, I'm going to say time for maybe one more question. Shaira in chat said, I wanted to know a little about the personal statement. How do you make it stand out? And which aspect do you focus on? What should it be more about? An interesting story or more about you?
I think the story is interesting because it's about you. I think like the purpose of kind of like these anecdotes is to kind of like reveal something about kind of your character. Um And I think often like the best way of doing that isn't just telling someone that like, okay, you think XYZ is important, but like really showcasing that through like a story. So I think like that's a benefit of kind of like the anecdotal approach. That said, like there's so many different ways of approaching the personal statement. I personally did like a sort of story. Um, but that's not to say that like that's necessarily like the only way of going about it. Um, I think in terms of like stuff that you need to make sure to include, I think it's just important to I think like specifically it's just like a you want to give a sense of like or and maybe in part like some sense of like your worldview that you think is maybe particularly unique to you. Um or maybe and like there might have been like particular factors in your background that's conducive to that view or kind of like how you've come to that belief. But I think often that's like a that's something that admission officers would be interested in knowing.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, being authentic, letting your own voice shine through, because they will undoubtedly get all these perfectly polished essays with zero tone and zero, I don't know, like genuineness to it almost. Like it seems like too robotic, too tailored. One way to go about it is if you of course, like sales is very much on my mind right now. So like if you're thinking of like a sales pitch or like an elevator pitch, like what's a 2-minute sentence or 2-minute description of yourself that you can give me that will make me want to admit you into Harvard? Like who makes what comprises you as a person? And then I would say like you can start off with that and then just showing off like the aspects that you're most proudest of and it just goes back to what I said first, like being authentic in your response and being true to who you are. And like that, the personal statement, I feel like is one of the best exercises on reflection. It's something that will definitely take multiple drafts. So be patient with yourself. It's okay. And as you start thinking about yourself and about your positive attributes, like it will come together. So just be patient with the process.
Right. I know we said last question, but I see Tanya with her hand up. You guys have like 1 more minute just to Tanya.
We got time.
Tanya, do you hear us? Do you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Ask the question. You're the last person.
Yes, sir. So just wanted to ask that when should we start writing these essays for like these universities?
Um, there's no like specific timeline. I think like don't rush them. just be kind to yourself. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're having to cram them. But maybe like a good time to like start thinking about them would be over the summer, prior to when applications are due. That's a good time to like start reflecting on like the sort of things that you, yeah, that you might want to talk about or include. Then it depends on like whether you're applying early or regular, but I say give yourself like a good maybe like 2 month period prior to like start writing on stuff, something like that. Just because like life is what it is, stuff comes up and whatnot, but you want to give yourself like space to be able to write and importantly like revise, have them looked over, get them redrafted.
Yeah, I would almost reverse engineer it. Think about what the deadline is for application in the year that you want to apply, and then give yourself enough time to work from there. Similar with like when you take your SATs or ACTs for anyone who's like US based, or any TOEFL exam, TOEFL exams, any English language exams. You kind of want to prepare yourself in advance. So plan out everything from the end date and work backwards. For some people, it will just take like, oh, Harvard applications are open. We've got 6 months to do it. Easy peasy. Other people, it will take like 2 years time. And also, if you want to take a gap year in between, if there's, some reason that you aren't able to finish it by the deadline, gap years are okay. Taking a year off is okay. Just, do something with it that you can then use to also get into Harvard, like work for a nonprofit or volunteer with some like local clinic doing something. Just be productive and let it also be guided by your passions and your values. I hope that makes sense.
Great. Thank you guys for a fantastic event. Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you so much, Hemi. Thank you so much, Rise team, for putting this together. Guys, let's just give a round of applause. Give the applause emoji too, if you can. Okay, so we'll be hosting more of these events in the future. Definitely just like let us know what kind of events you guys like to see. I see in the comment section, a lot of people are talking about comment apps. Probably gonna do something like that in the future. And if you guys are trying to do some high level research, look into Rise. There's really no better place for like doing research, working with PhD students. And if you guys are looking to like do passion projects, apply to college, and just become an undeniable candidate for these Ivy League schools, check out Pegasus. And yeah, we will follow up. Have a great day, guys. Have a good night wherever you guys are in the world. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.